Good evening, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here at Wellfleet Public Library. It is my privilege and pleasure to be introducing our poets tonight. Before we begin, if you could just silence your cell phone, that would be so appreciated. And this is a really special reading tonight. So Edward is celebrating the release of The Rock in the Middle of the Road, the chapbook that just came out. So I'm excited to hear him read some of the poems here. And also, Edward and Robbie went to high school together. So what an amazing celebration of, a friendship that's, been many, many years in the creative. I think of it as like a symphony, it's like all these instruments and years just add to the complexity. So just really happy to have you here tonight, and thank you all so much for being here. Robbie is going to read first tonight, and then Edward. So I will begin by introducing Robbie, who has joined us from Boston, correct? Yeah, so thank you so much. All right. Robbie Gamble's poems have appeared in Scoundrel Time, Slipstream, Forklift, Ohio, Rhino, Panegyrus, and Poet Lore. He was the winner of the 2017 Carve Poetry Prize and has been nominated for Best of the Net. He is the assistant poetry editor for Solstice, a magazine of diverse voices. When not thinking about image and line breaks, he works as a nurse practitioner caring for homeless people in Boston. Please all join me in welcoming our first poet, Robbie Gamble.
Gabrielle, thank you so much, and thank you all for coming out. It's a beautiful space, and it's when Ned sort of emailed me to say, "Would you like to do this thing out on the Cape?" I thought, "Wow, what a great thing to do!" We've sort of gone in very different trajectories over the last 40 years. I don't like to do the math, but we both went to Brookline High School together and had the same English teacher, and I think some of the influences of that community and those classes have trickled on down. So I'd like to start by doing a couple of poems from that relate to Brookline, my hometown. And I actually, having lived far away from there again, have come full circle and live in Brookline again, right on the doorstep of Boston. And I'd like to do two poems that sort of relate to the Brookline Tab, which is our local paper. There's a woman who writes the police blotter for the Brookline Tab, and she's a genius. She takes these police incidents and writes them up in this incredibly dry manner. It's theater of the absurd, and it's great material for poetry. So this first poem is called Abandoned Bouncy House. Oh, the baritone drone of your blower fan, dumb as a woodchuck, waiting for weeds to grow. Some anxious neighbor reported you to the police twice in a week, all the lights out and no one home day after day. Just you squatting, swollen out back. Each dusk, a clutch of coyotes sidles up from wetlands below to sniff out your tautness, shrug, and move on. You were written up in the local paper. If there were cake crumbs lodged in your seams, the chipmunks must have found them, and the neighborhood kids avoid that yard now, the dark corner under the linden tree, its ominous, rotting crotch. When I was a child, I ached for lonely things, unloved, stuffed animals, a drifting red balloon, and it's you I settle on now, impervious to rain, wobbling slightly in a breeze, your bloaty form barely tethered to power cord and hum. I'm waiting for your moment. First snowfall, a blackout, a mouse-nibbled leak, the joyous return of the rental van. And this is called Incidents. One cool spring morning, a man at a streetcar stop was cutting his hair off with a chef's knife. A fellow commuter found this disturbing, called the police. An officer was dispatched. By the time he got there, the man had left. The officer interviewed witnesses, wrote out his report, which was picked up by the anonymous columnist who writes the weekly summary of police incidents in the town paper. This columnist has a dry, concise wit, a brilliant sense of the absurd. I look forward to the column every week, and this morning, in addition to the incident of the self-barber at the streetcar stop, I learned about a fox running around on a daycare center playground and a man who tried to steal vanilla extract and maple syrup from an upscale grocery store. This same morning, a long-awaited report was released to the public, and I also learned that the president had leaned back in his chair and said, "I'm fucked," when he first learned his campaign was under investigation. I wonder if the self-barber and the would-be thief were one and the same. Had he been planning to make waffles to celebrate his new haircut, but was short a couple of ingredients? I have heard the president spends an hour or so each morning preening his comb over into that distinctive orange helmet shape, and I bet he likes waffles too. I wonder now if a daycare center is a metaphorical hen house. I wonder about Washington, all that fertile swampland, and how we should carry on hounding after that fox. So this next poem is kind of, Beth Thompson, who was our English teacher, exposed us to many great authors and poets, and one of them was Anne Sexton. And I actually got to hear her read one of the last public readings she did before she died. I was 14, it was in Harvard Square. So this is called Anne Sexton. In a Marimekko sheath, she took the stage, faced the expectant crowd, packed into the burnished balconies of Sanders Theater, all eyeing her for new weaknesses since the latest breakdown. She cradled her vulnerabilities like a gold lame clutch, rock star goddess just sprung from McLean, and launched into the fury of Cox. My teenage head unhinged. How can she say that? Emboldened, she plunged into a playlist of greatest hits, Her Kind, Rumpelstiltskin, said the poet to the analyst, the audience nodding at every nuance. Towards the end, she debuted a piece where she rode out to an island to play poker with God, and a fan floated an objection, said the players held too many aces between them. She smiled, confessed she wasn't much at cards, and promised to re-deal her hand. By October, she checked out for good, wrapped up in exhaust and her mother's furs. Delicate dwarf star, caked in mascara, flaring gloriously before the implosion. And so I grew up in that generation of sensitive teenage boys, moping about in dim bedrooms with our open composition books, hoping to catch a particle from her dissipating glow. And one more that has a little bit to do with Brookline. This is called On Learning That Ho Chi Minh Worked as a Baker at the Parker House Hotel in Boston. That was in Ken Burns. That was the first episode of Ken Burns' Vietnam documentary. It's like, what? So, okay. On learning that Ho Chi Minh worked as a baker at the Parker House Hotel, Boston. Nothing more iconic than a Parker House roll. But Ho was yet a clean-shaven young man in exile, intent on learning the rituals of Western kitchens, kneading, proofing, shaping, flinging battalions of dough into coal-fired tunnels. And now I press my thumbs into this crescent-shaped crust. It resists, breaks open, spilling a steaming waft of mud, charred foliage, suppurating flesh, and then the musty grief that filled the church for Dev Cochran, who lived down the street, shipped out, then shot in the throat when his platoon was overrun, classified as MIA. After 2 years waiting, his mother couldn't stand it, held a funeral without a flag-draped coffin. I was just a kid in a pew, listening to his sister sob. Impatient to get home for tomato soup and crackers in our wainscoted kitchen, the talk of the cuckoo clock, the TV news snapped off for meals, my mother refusing the crackle of burning thatched-roofed hamlets, not an appropriate backdrop for my brother's slurping. And Dev's name was taken up, his absent remains embodied in letters, a bronze plaque outside the high school auditorium, a black granite entry on the Washington Mall. While Ho's beard emerged an apparition, a wispy swath of royal blue, 8 stories high, profiled on a Boston Harbor liquid gas tank, a brushstroke, a gesture by an anti-war nun, commissioned by the utility to beautify their structure. A coincidence, the artist suggested. One of those things wavering on our horizon at the very edge of sensation, like in all the documentary footage. The unrecorded stench of combat. So this is the centennial year of the Boston molasses flood, the Great Boston molasses flood of 1919. And that just kind of blows my mind, like a 4-story high wave of molasses taking out the North End. And a couple years ago I wrote a poem about it. It's called Boston Molasses Flood. And at some point I realized, what was the molasses thinking in this moment? So this is called Boston Molasses Flood, January 15th, 1919. 1. In the sweet deep of the tank holding me, a bubbling up, thick liquid char on flake of rust, heaving against steel bandings. Rivets rack and complain, I work them, murmur, worry, worry, a long time come now. Then leak through. North End mothers send their kids outdoors to scrape my drips off into crocks to bake meager beans. The company conceals my dribbles with paint. I am an umber column, 5 stories high, 2 train cars across. 2. Born of shackled African hands, sent west to the Indies to chop, crush, boil the cane. I flow into barrels, shipped northward to New England colonies. Then distill into a grog for cargo to be traded for more bodies. Round and round the ships fly, liquid, limbs, chains heaving, the merchants culling their cut at every port. I am the blood of commerce, sweet, sweet father of demon rum, a catchment, a wound, festering over centuries. 3. I hear talk of a prohibition, the distillery spigots cranked shut. I am 2 million gallons backed up. Do you believe I will evaporate like that gracious vapor, freedom? I lurk in pressured places with the bones of all my ancestors. 4. A midwinter thaw, warmth breeds, I bubble and expand, stretch the bands, and a rivet ejects from the tank, another, then scores more, like Gatling bullets spraying the rail yard. The tank plates unzip, and I heave free a great wave, viscous and falling, 40 feet high, a dark curve eclipsing Commercial Street, splintering houses gone and more gone, elevated train columns buckled, horses scream, men look up mid-smoke, women's skirts scatter, flying dogs howl, crash where I curl into carriages, gurgle into pushcarts, lampposts, downspouts, ooze, momentum squeezed, chest deep into side streets. Here a man, a horse, a child, each a bubble hung above the lips. So this is a library, and I have a poem. It's sort of a library poem. It's called If Emily Dickinson Had Used the Dewey Decimal System. And so it's kind of it's sort of two things in tandem. So I'm going to do it in alphabetical order. So I wrote this poem, and then a friend of mine who's a librarian told me, and this kind of blew my mind, that Melville Dewey and Emily Dickinson lived about a half mile apart from each other in Amherst, and both were kind of doing, like he was developing the system while she was really sort of at the height of her powers, and it was the synergy just kind of, wow, I didn't know that, but it's kind of cool. So I'll do the numbers first, and then the words. I mean, it's an alphabetical order. It's Dewey, Dickinson, numbers, words. If Emily Dickinson had used the Dewey Decimal System: 126, 303.6, 153.8, 118. 638, 355.2, 363.8, 536, 154.3, 553.3, 002, 341.6, 332.7, 352.3, 757, 248.5, 523.8. The self in conflict with the will, such force and energy. As bees police their food supply in heat and reveries. An iron book, the law of war, gives credit to the fire, while human figures and their parts are witnessing the stars. A couple years ago, I took a visit to Japan with my family, and there's a couple of good poems that I got out of that. We went to Hiroshima and saw the Atomic Museum there, which is Hiroshima is just kind of an amazing place. So this is called Hiroshima Tricycle. You alone, hunched in a windowless corner of the stunned Atomic Museum. Hiroshima Tricycle, your boy is gone, your tires melted, your proud frame fused. Who will guide you through the rubble? And my shadow passes over the shadow of one who is vaporized on stone. Hiroshima Tricycle, I can tell you only this. The sky outside is as blue and smug as the morning the plane came to drop its gift of sun upon your astonished city. And the black rain fell in greasy sheets, puddling around you. The broken ones drank greedily. It was their last drink. You still welcome us here. It should not be so. It should not be so. And this is called Cannot. Near the Imperial Palace in Tokyo, a map indicates, among other civic sites, a homeless shelter, rendered in English as shelter for persons who cannot go home. And later that afternoon in Ginza crowds, we see one meandering homeless woman parting streams of shoppers and salarymen. The space they give her aimlessness does not seem born from some reflex of revulsion. Could it be respect for her particular cannot, a reverence for the gulf between this fine spring day and what no longer exists for her? We cannot understand what pressures, is it shame, are defining her solitude, as we cannot decipher the pulsing neon characters all above us, or her trailing mumblings, or the nuances that spill the gaps between our cultures. We are caught in fumblings of I and thou, like magnets charged with ambiguous polarity, circling, fainting, bouncing off unseen forces. And though we travel through a foreign bustle for a time, soon we will be going home, to that consequential place where we cannot imagine, really, how transient we might be. So this is a little lighter. It's called Mass Pike, 9:51 p.m. So this is Gas Pump TV. This is the crawler that caught my attention on Gas Pump TV. These are the numbers, Dow, Red Sox, and weather, that wrote on the crawler that caught my attention on Gas Pump TV. This is a man with impeccable hair explaining the numbers, the Dow's getting better, underscored by the crawler that holds my attention on Gas Pump TV. These are the graphics that loop through the air, controlled by the man with impeccable hair, as he soothes me with numbers. A cold front tomorrow. There's a break in the crawler that held my attention on Gas Pump TV. This is the gas flowing into my car. I've pumped it for years without needing to stare at a screen of a man with impregnable hair and the vital statistics he thinks I should crave in a self-serving ploy to command my attention with gas pump TV. Now, here come the ads, Tic Tacs, Slim Jims, Red Bull, neon come-ons of shrink-wrapped delectable fare to throw in with the purchase of gas for my car, interrupting the man in his graphics and hair. For these sales numbers matter. They pay for the screen in this 3-minute pitch for my precious attention by Gas Pump TV. This is a synapse that arcs through my brain, trying to signal fatigue and a bladder that's full, now derailed by the stimuli spewed from the ads. I could use a Slim Jim, no snacks left in the car, and the graphics are plugging a 2-for-1 sale. These are numbers worth chewing on, synapse be damned, by my lack of attention, all thanks to invention of Gas Pump TV. And these are the highways I travel along, paved with data or asphalt. I don't really care. I'm too tired of driving with a breeze in my hair and unease in my mind that I'm not anywhere, just particulate motion on a randomized course, till I slow and collide with a morsel of news that will enervate each of us manning our cars as we crawl down the on-ramps away from the halos of Gas Pump TV. So I'm a nurse practitioner in my non-writing life. Mostly I work with homeless folks in Boston. But for the last 5 summers, I've spent some time down on the Arizona-Mexico border working with a group called No More Deaths that provides material and medical aid for migrants that are passing through a really remote section of the Sonora Desert there. We put out water and food, and if we encounter people, we give them aid. And it's an incredibly stark part of the country. It's very dangerous if you're traveling through it. And the militarization on the border there is pretty extraordinary. And the cruelty sometimes that you see on the part of Border Patrol and other people it's pretty awful. But so I've written some poems about them, and this one is called A Can of Pinto Beans. Just below the ridgeline saddle, tossed to the side of the trail, lying dented among rocks, bleached label peeled back, and the downhill-facing end of the can stabbed through by some Border Patrol agent's K-bar knife. A precise wound, moldering around the edges, with filaments wafting down the corners. No, they're streams of tiny ants crawling in and out, bearing flecks of nourishment away. And I have one more about the border. I'm going to get a drink. This is called Memo to the Border Patrol Agent Who Poured Out the Water We Left in the Desert. I saw you. I saw you hustle past in your green striped SUV, casting a huff of dust across our windshield. 10 minutes later, we got to the radio tower, and the gallon jugs we had left for migrants were all poured out, the ground still shiny moist in 115 degrees of parch. These are the facts. And although this is not a binding document, I have several questions. 1, do you understand what thirst is? A thirst for home so strong, a man will walk 90 miles under bone-bright sun to quench it. Not a death wish, not a martyr's pilgrimage, not a penchant for Air Jordans or a welfare check or some Mickey Mouse accessories for his toddler daughter. Just a semi-safe place to work and live and work, fill a belly, harbor a family. 2, what does it profit you to be cruel? Did you thrill to the glug of the jugs, heaving their quench into the dust? Were you the kid who ignited ants with a magnifying glass? How cozy is that government issue paycheck in your pocket? 3, and this one is kind of biblical, so listen close. Who is your neighbor? Who? You and I, amigo. You and I, and who else? The passports we both holster are embossed with the self-same spread eagle clawing at arrows and olive twigs. Such a coveted ticket. But plunk this in your trooper-shaved skull. We are the newcomers on this hemisphere, and the footpaths you patrol have veined these continents for millennia, with no regard for turnstiles or trade quotas or zip ties or drone strikes or dreams of a wall drawn arbitrarily across the sand. I dream this. You learn to say welcome, neighbor. These days make me crazy. So, you know the old adage, there is no I in teen? This is called, there is an I in white. There is an I in white. Right at the center, all sounds radiating outward from its core, the long vowel sound creating proud space for the architecture of the word. Tall and slender, lucid, perfect in its upright stance at the hub of all things. The word could not exist without the vowel sonic reach of the I, as the remaining letters on their own would just eke out a damp puff crossing the lips with a barely audible. Notice the letters relegated to the periphery, the W and the E, which could spell out the collective we if they were not self-separated. These letters are complex, with angles and branches facing out in many different directions. The components of the we are barricaded from the I by the henchman letters H and T, erect and vigilant, vertical strokes protecting the I with horizontal spacers to keep the outside world at bay. There is potential here. The H introduces a turbulence, a sense of living breath to the word. It could be moving to the profound question, why? But the T cuts off that possibility by dropping its consonant chop. It might have just have concluded a whit, an inconsequential trifle, were it not for the unappreciated labor of the trailing E, straining to hoist the I skyward into all of its long vowel glory. And the I just stands there, insulated from the tension swirling all around it, blissful in its singularity. I does not feel alone, attended to by its acolytes, but I will never know the we in all of their painful complexity, and they will never be able to reach through and disturb my safeguarded ego. As I said, I'm a nurse practitioner. I work with homeless folks, and this is called "A Homeless Patient Explains the Cause of His Keloid Scars." A homeless patient explains the cause of his keloid scars, dropping his pants to reveal dark, meaty ropes crisscrossing his buttocks and thighs, snaking up into his torso, fibrous and taut, twisting his gait into a painstaking shuffle. I got burned in the riots the day after Dr. King got shot. I was 5 years old. That's it. I can't help myself from realizing that on that day, I was a little boy too. And I think I'll end on something more upbeat. I know I tend to be a bit of a Debbie Downer, but there's hope in things. And this, do you know so this is called murmuration. You know those videos of sort of flocks of starlings that look very organic and they're sort of floating through the air. It's just mesmerizing. I could watch those for hours. But watching one of those made me think of this. This is called murmuration. All you creatures, you flocks, you herds, you swarms, you marchers, you finny plangent schools beneath the waves, you who stream, who ripple, who wrinkle, who undulate, who billow and swell. You with gills, with tail feathers, with antennae, with antlers, with flippers, with placards, with exoskeletons. Understand that you have been scrutinized by scientists, behaviorists with heads on a swivel. Yes, the mathematicians have pored over your data and uncovered 3 simple rules that govern your loopy collective arcs. 1, move in the same direction as your neighbors. 2, remain close to your neighbors. 3, avoid collisions with your neighbors. And you, whether krill or starling or herring or wildebeest or suffragette or freedom rider or fruit bat or honeybee, All you need to hold your space in the swarm is to maintain a conscious awareness of 7 to 10 of your precious neighbors. That's all. No need for a supreme leader to dictate the flow. See, you behave this way because of the slavering predators who hang around the periphery. And if you are one of 10,000 or 10,000 million, they can hardly hunt you down through the vortex of all of you. So go, smear the skies at dusk, swirl the purple deeps, thunder across a plateau, descend on the Capitol, proclaim your I am, upholding space in the choir of we are, and survive, surge, heave, survive, and thrive. Thanks.
Wow, that was really awesome. I'm like, okay, I gotta catch my breath. Thank you so much, Robbie. That was just, whew. All right. Okay. Edward D. Miller's poetry appears in Aesthetic Apostle, Curating Alexandria, Hinchas de Poesia, Wilderness House Literary Journal, the Boston Literary Magazine, Crack the Spine, Red Fez, Drunk Monkeys, and the Bangalore Review. His chapbook, The Rock in the Middle of the Road, is published by Prolific Press. He writes a column for Cold Noon, International Journey of Travel Writing and Traveling Cultures. Edward is a professor of screen and audio studies at the City University of New York. Please join me in welcoming our next poet. I'm so excited, Edward Miller.
Thank you, guys. There's a lot of people here that are very important to me, and I'm so grateful that they showed up. One person, because I'm hoping that our English teachers might see this because it's going to go out on YouTube. So they might be excited to know that Susan Rosen is in the audience. Resident of Eastham, who we also went to high school. And I actually think I went to 1 year of Driscoll with you, too. Yeah, so from 8th grade to 12th grade, although I wasn't there the whole time. Thank you to the Wellfleet Library, which I've frequented since I've been 18 years old, which has been an important part of my life. And thank you to Gabrielle and to Robbie for agreeing to come out. So this first poem that I'm going to read from my little collection, and I'm going to read the poems that are sort of Wellfleety, Cape Coddy. Took place at Gull Pond. Has anybody been to Gull Pond? So it was kind of early in June, but it was quite hot. So I thought, let me go swim at Gull Pond. And maybe I'll be the only person there. But I wasn't. There was a very loud family there. And I tried to pretend that I'm not a nosy person, but I am sort of nosy. And there was a rather corpulent young man there. And as it turns out, I had been rather corpulent as a child, and I somewhat identified with him a little bit. And he was trying to perfect his cannonball. And he wanted his family, maybe his father, maybe his mother, maybe both of them, maybe his brother, to applaud his attempts at making the perfect cannonball. So this poem is called Form and Splash. At the town pond, I overheard a family's vacation banter. "Judge my cannonball," the more corpulent son implored. Obediently, they all turned to witness his jump from the raft. Arms grasped knees in midair. The splatter was lackluster, and waves barely disturbed the glassy surface. The crestfallen kid knew the verdict. Good, but far from perfection. In a moment of nosiness, I consulted his folks. How do you recognize excellence in a cannonball? The skinny brother pleaded the fifth. The dad acted as if the question was never asked. But the mother clarified in testimony, awash with broader implications, form and splash. Thank you, Lori. So this poem is called Up North, and sometimes I think, although I'm not the best singer, as my spouse quite well knows, but I do like to sing, and sometimes I just think it's better to sing rather than to talk. This is called Up North. Do not be fooled by the latitude. The Gulf Stream protects us coastal folk from the Arctic gale. Even when the light works a half day, noise will never freeze. It lifts, it lasts long, it lands. Phrases boil down to sound. Do not be fooled by the Gulf Stream. The air itself is shivering while the pine trees try to muffle the high seas of four-legged tenors. All hail the succinct moon that redeems the night. It is light, it is shape, it is movement. My old choir master warned me that speech stains the sheet music. And so I cue you to your solo. Please free the composition from stasis. Chanting will warm the room. Whatever you do, just remember to shake off the cold, wet words. This poem is about Cape Cod Bay, our precious bay. And sometimes I think that we, as residents and visitors, that we tend to project ourselves onto the bodies of water that surround us, and also the animals and the landscape, without necessarily thinking about what they might want from us, right? It's more like what we want from them. And sometimes I think it's good to acknowledge that they, too, are beings, that they are entities that are part of our lives, but they're also part of their own lives, independent of us. So this is called Cape Cod Bay Dislikes Narrative, meaning it doesn't want the story told by you or by me. So here's a story to not tell the story of Cape Cod Bay. Just because the bay shrugs indifference doesn't mean its torrent will fail to engulf you. If you ever thought time stands still, think again. It moves incessantly, in and out of every harbor and inlet. For example, the tide enlists the whitecap and the current in its plot to stymie sequence. Repetition prompts change, not the other way around. Just because the end appears closer tomorrow doesn't mean I am unable to live into the quotidian. Once submerged, I come to my senses. Any internal truth worth its salt censors itself. Still, some statements splatter against the seawall, while others eddy. No, not literally. Any questions? Consult the harbor master. Just because the bay neither hiccups nor burps doesn't mean it is muted. Its endlessness veils a vulnerability to the assertion of a before and after. Let's agree to disagree and repress the urge to tell the tale of a water body. This poem takes place on Wellfleet Town Pier. Has anybody walked on Wellfleet Town Pier? They have all these benches that are there that are for people's relatives, and my dear mother, I thought, maybe I should get a bench for my mother, because she loved Wellfleet. And then I consulted the harbor master there. I think he's since retired, and he was like, oh, I'm sick and tired of these goddamn benches. Because apparently people don't like it when other people sit on benches that are dedicated to their relatives. And like even recently I saw somebody put flowers, which is sweet, but also it's like if you put a bench there, there maybe should be for everyone. Anyways, so I would walk my dog there. Why would I walk my dog there? Well, it's a good place to walk a dog because there's no ticks there. And for some older people, which I guess I'm now too, the surface is very the same. There's nothing to trip over. It's good for walking. And so there were these two gentlemen that sat at this bench in the morning, and I assumed it was dedicated to someone that was connected to their lives. And I did kind of spy on it one time when they weren't sitting there to do a little research, as it were. So this is thinking about their relationship to the person that the bench is dedicated to, town pier. A memorial plaque to a woman who delighted in this view separates two men sitting on a harbor-facing bench. Her son, early 30s, sun-bleached curls, a stylish chaos, a lento baritone stalled by ums, one hand cooled by a glass of homemade kombucha. A shell fisherman who surfs while the tide salts his oyster beds. Her husband, late 60s, an Ivy League blowback in icy gray, flawless grammar issued forth by a presto tenor, one hand warmed by a mug of black coffee. A retired editor in demand for doubles, if not for his backhand, then for his rib ticklers. They look upon a coastline as sharp-cut as their profiles. Deriding the town's selectmen for acts of corruption, they also shake their heads in disbelief at neighbors' asking prices for properties that lack even a glimpse of the bay. In other words, they gossip. But in the breathing spaces, her imagined presence moors them to the pier. This is a love poem. So it's not set in Wellfleet, but it could be. So it's about imagining a place that is beyond the last stop of a train that many people can't get to, but people could get to. We don't have trains out here anymore, so it could be set here. Beyond the last stop on the commuter train. One afternoon, I watched you skipping stones. If love is a locale, then we ensconced there, a fishing village, just beyond the last stop on the commuter train. Admit it. My gaze intensified your technique. Relax. Show-offs can be such good providers, even if the gift is an indulgence in skimming the surface. Later, I will devise a memory from a perspective I never experienced. Soft lighting with your dark hair casting no shadow. A tight two-shot, somehow scented like a Victorian love letter. An event curates itself, a countdown to reunion. My confession. When you are not here, I take your seat at the table. Later, I lie in your indent on the mattress. No doubt a disorder explains my behavior. But before we diagnose each other, let's imagine the remembrance of how happy we look in the photo we compose upon your return, trim with all the right wrinkles. Your cologne recites ginger and bergamot, and I find the right vase and place for your flowers in a cabin in a fishing village just beyond the last stop on the commuter train. Thanks, guys. This is a poem more set in Cape Cod, perhaps. It's about how chaos meets pattern in the everyday, and about how sometimes life or nature can seem chaotic, like even a few weeks ago when we lost power, and we heard that there was a tornado coming from Harwich, and then everything sort of went back into its pattern after Eversource came through. And it's called, I Wouldn't Bet a Huckleberry to a Persimmon. Hail the strawberry moon. When the non sequitur battles the logical sequence, all bets are off. Without a garden tool, rootstocks of self-sabotage deracinate, An inappropriate wit has outperformed bourgeois manners, and an infectious guffaw pins propriety to the floor like a gung-ho wrestler. Hail the strawberry moon. Words fall short even as they stretch like shade in late afternoon. Once our raise comes through, you can bet your bottom dollar. No more schmatas from H&M. Retirement becomes a bouncing ball we follow. Ah, the life of an elderly expat, dazzled by the light through palm trees, but one eye on the exchange rate. Let's dance in the moonlight to Van Morrison or Morrissey. All the strawberries have been picked. How engorged and shameless they are. Our senses are at their mercy. Hedge your bets. A memory or two will be mixed into a jam-filled mason jar. Tonight, the moon ripens again. If I could howl without sounding rehearsed, I would. Place your bets. The Final Jeopardy answer is, obviously, who is Edgar Allan Poe? Ravens are crows, but not every crow is a raven. Regardless, could they please keep the cawing to a dull roar? Hail the strawberry moon. Hail randomness and repetition, too. This poem is a longer one, so bear with me. It's a story poem. Who here knows about the Herring River Restoration Project? So, you don't know about it? So the Herring River, there's a dike down at the end of Chequassett Neck Road before Great Island, and the town of Wellfleet and Truro. As far as I know, they decided to take away this dike in stages so that the Herring River can be restored to its rightful place, if you will. I guess I'm for it. I mean, I'm not going to make a political speech for it. And I don't know where it stands right now. So, but my neighbors were cleaved by it in terms of who was for it and who was against it. And I got in touch with the people who were against it because I thought, well, maybe it's going to damage my property. And they really wanted me to join and be part of the media campaign. And I was like, and then other people I knew were very for it. So it became like a... And some people are, you know, in the golf course, which matters to quite a few people in town, you know, for sure. It's going to lose a little bit of its hole and all this. And at the same time, my academic department is like a lot of academic departments. They decided, or we decided collectively to all hate each other. We're like, well, it's come time. We've worked pretty good together. Let's feud. What to do, but not get along. And I mean, there were real things not to get along about, for sure, but it was really, so this poem is about both, and maybe also about something else. So it's about a small town that decides not to agree with itself anymore, and a small academic department that does the same. And it's called The Rock in the Middle of the Road. And it's based upon a very short poem by a Brazilian poet, Carlos Drummond de Andrade, which is The Rock on the Road. So bear with me, it takes a little while to seep in. I'm going to read it slowly. The rock in the middle of the road appeared one morning when the sun burned through the fog. Explanations scattered everywhere along Main and Commercial Street to explain the rock's arrival. Surveillance videotaped revealed nothing, and no one confessed. A committee was formed to make a recommendation on what to do with the rock in the middle of the road. Two opposing factions emerged. I couldn't take a side, even though neutrality made me unpopular. Quarrels congregated everywhere along Main and Commercial Street. Opinions swayed daily due to impassioned oration in front of Town Hall. Though illegal U-turns were no longer possible, some found salvation in the rock. But many others took offense not only to the rock as eyesore or obstacle, but also to the view of those who flaunted their eagerness to disagree. Mr. Truman, for example, was looking for an excuse to harbor resentment toward Mr. Winsome. Truman secretly celebrated the rock in the middle of the road, even though publicly he advocated moving it. He used the ensuing fracas as an opportunity to make a new enemy. And Winsome was surprised how quickly he hated his former friend. The community found no middle ground on what to do with the rock in the middle of the road. It remained in place for 1 year, despite the slight majority that voted to remove it in a special referendum. Protesters blockaded the road when they learned a work crew was sent to cart the rock away. They chanted, "The rock is God's will," or "The rock is perfect and pretty." And so the rock stayed. The work crew did not dare defy God or the love of beauty. I waited for the strawberry moon to roll the rock back to where I found it. In the morning, anxiety sprouted up everywhere along Main and commercial streets. All agreed. Life without the rock would be worse than with it. But I suspected that my neighbors were bereft of the bickering. By evening, the council announced that a committee had been formed to decide whether or not a replacement would be found for the rock in the middle of the road. No doubt nostalgia, like the fog, would opaque the night. This poem is a ghost story. It's partially inspired by this Chilean writer that I like to read, Alejandro Zambra, and he wrote, talking about another writer, that childhood is a time in service of ghosts. And I often think about, not that I was a big ghost believer when I was a kid, but one is more vulnerable to ghost stories when one is younger. And also in my family, not to reveal too much, I had an aunt that I only found out about later in life. She had been put in an institution for being schizophrenic. So this is called The Great Aunt. My second cousin, once removed, once asked my mother, "Where do ghosts come from?" They come from shame and family secrets. They come from an acre where the untold fertilizes a storied garden. My young cuz had a follow-up question. Does this house have a ghost? None that you can ever see. None that will ever harm you. But long ago, your great aunt was believed to be touched, and so was taken to a special hospital that was like a prison. The high-handed doctors were electrified by untruths, and all the nurses became stoked by bitterness, save one, saved by laughter. Yet the magnet between Auntie and her nurse was blocked by innuendo and reproach. Some say their shadows pogo together in the abandoned asylum. But on holidays, Auntie comes here to be reunited with her family. The more we remember, the more she forgives. And what does the ghost of Auntie say? And how will I know she is there? Though Auntie's specter is speechless, whenever your laugh sounds like another's, whenever you sing a silly song over and over, whenever you spin around and around to embrace your own dizziness, know that she is pleased to be beside you, for the feeling of your own strangeness has become a music, and she is whirling to its rhythm. Thank you. So I'm going to finish here unless you guys request an encore. I have an encore over here. A number of years ago now, there was this murder case in Truro about this woman who was a fashion editor, and she had, everyone's nodding, so I don't need to explain it to you. What's that?
Explain it.
So she had an affair apparently with a local man who lived in Provincetown, and he already had had a family. She became pregnant, but it seems that the man that they put in jail for the crime worked for Fraser, which is the company that comes and picks up my trash, and he was an African American, and some believe that he's not the real person. This poem's not really about that case. I mean, although it refers to it. But it's also trying to say that in the place that we live, the land and the animals that live here and the plants, we may be watching them, but they may be watching us too, and know exactly what's going on. So it's called Murder in Truro, or Wellfleet. Oh, and everybody knows where the sluice is, right? In Wellfleet? The sluice, it's this place you get to go down a dirt road, and it's a little trickle of water in between two ponds. And it's kind of a place where a lot of local people don't go anymore. It's more filled with New Yorkers reading the New York Times on Sunday. I mean, like me. But I don't go there that much anymore. So, Murder in Truro, or Wellfleet. Now is the time to cross-examine these clouds. Each is a witness. Each winks at the turtles and seals. They tittle-tattle on the beaches once the New Yorkers leave. Yes, those tiny seaside shacks are named for flowers. From wisteria to azalea, every rental unit is a potential crime scene. Years later, I find the view both quaint and insufferable. Behold the etiquette used to apportion the sunshine. The ladylike land squeezes itself into an isthmus. Later, the lighthouse will croon. Such sounds covet the form of a boomerang. Low tide may be inevitable, but it is so sluggish. Yet, when the bay's bottom is finally revealed, I am always shocked. True, the surfeit of fiddler crabs should embarrass the locals. If you need to know, the trickle of water between the two ponds is called the sluice. Thank you. So I'm going to finish as my encore with a poem partially written in my head whilst waiting to make a left turn on Route 6. Not complaining, but it can take a while in August and July. And for those of you who live year-round, it must be a total effing pain in the ass. For those of us, like me, who am here earlier in the season in late May and June, I'm like, wow, where did it go? It's also about the fact, I'm a media scholar of some sort, and sometimes my dreams and the show that I'm binge watching and falling asleep to on Netflix or HBO or Hulu, I can't tell if what I'm dreaming is a TV show, or is the TV show also a dream. What else should I introduce about this? Oh, who here has been to Chiquesset Chocolate in North Truro? It's pretty good, huh? It's pretty pricey though, too. You're like, should I pay this much for this? What's that?
It was in the Times this weekend.
It was in the Times this weekend. Worth a visit, and I mean, they make a great product, but it's pricey, and I'm not complaining. I love it. So Chiquesset Chocolate also features in this Dream TV show. And so this is hot off the presses. It's really a work in progress. It's not perfected just yet. Or maybe never will be. I dreamt I binge-watched an episode over and over. When he awakens, the dream tucks itself in. At bedtime, the dream starts the night shift. And so, inside the lazy contraction of slumber is an energetic stretch. And so, he fell into an action-packed reverie that was kind of like a first-person shooter video game, except that all the characters were familiar to him, even though they were more muscular and had perfect hair. Behind the cartoonish blood and the bubblegum guns, the dream had a not-so-subtle message, spoken in a baritonal voice, source unseen. You may win, you may lose, but either way, you survive. During the day, the dream hibernated at the edge of his awareness. The dream snored, getting louder as his head slumped in the afternoon. And so, it was kind of like an impatient car, eager to make a left turn on Route 6 in August. And so, it accelerated kind of like it decided to make the light toward Truro. Remarkably, the dream reached the center of his catnap in no time at all, as if it was trapped inside Chiquesset chocolate with lots of money. Kinda. And this is what the dream told him. You may win, you may lose, but either way, you survive. Thanks, guys. And thanks to you two people.